couldn't. Oh, thank you, Matthew has started the recording for this final session. Yes, James, who runs the textiles courses here at London Met, really unfortunately couldn't be here today, so I've stepped in for the final panel, which is on textile production. I just want to say how much I've enjoyed the day so far. My own research interests are in design and architecture and the kind of hidden mechanisms, my book about an editor of a magazine in architecture. So I'm just really fascinated in these discussions about makers and how they work, even though it's not directly my specialism. So this afternoon's panel is our final one. We're on textile production, and our first speaker is Gizem Oz. So hopefully you're here, Gizem. I can see you. Excellent. Do you want to share your?
Yeah, hi.
Oh,
okay. I am the first one. Okay.
Yes, I'm afraid that Georgina Gulsman has not been able to be here today. So we've just got 2 speakers this afternoon. But like we said, hopefully that gives us a bit more time for conversation. So Gizem's paper is on the topic learning from a communal weaving practice as a source of design knowledge.
Yes, exactly. And I am sharing my screen, I think.
You are.
You all see the
screen. That's it. That's
okay.
Great.
Yes. Hi. My name is Gizem. I am a design researcher from Turkey with a background in industrial design. My research experience revolves around the relationship between local craft production, making as a participatory activity, and design anthropology. And okay. And today I will talk about my PhD research with a group of women weavers in a village in Turkey. Through this fieldwork, I posit the local craft practices as valuable sources from which designers can learn from, collaborate with, and so expand and diversify the design field. Throughout my discussion, I will also emphasize some methodological explorations that emerge from this dialogue between situated craft practices and design fields. This is the village. In this village in Turkey, during the summer months, women from many households come together, meet on the street, set up this car-sized loom together, and weave rugs and bags. They don't sell these products. It is not for selling. Actual selling is frowned upon in the village because they think that the value of handcrafts cannot be measured with money. The only reason they weave is for dowries. And for those who may not familiar with, dowry is, although geographically diverse and historically loaded term, in the case of this village, dowry is just basically a marriage transaction, including gifts from bride's family to the couple's new home. As they weave, the women enjoy the company of other female relatives and neighbors. There are always extra stools around the loom for visiting neighbors. They chat, help each other while children play around. As girls grow up, they have help with the weaving, also learn at the same time. And when they grow up, they weave for their own children. Grandmothers also sit around the loom, engage in conversation and help. And each step of this weaving process involves heavily physically demanding and complex activities. And it requires many people working together, from assembling the loom to distributing of woven goods. Weaving in the village I think is an intergenerational collaborative process of learning, making products, but as well as building and reproducing the social relations and norms within the community. So I visited the field 3 summers, and I aim to understand the embedded knowledge of these women's practice and define the different forms of relationship that enable this long-term participatory and cooperative making designing capacity among the group. And this aim comes from a result of my critical examination of design practices and role of the design researcher in local rural contexts. Design research, design practice examples in this context most of the time come from social design field, where co-designing and participatory methods employed to trigger change or solve a problem within a specific community. This intervention can be economical, such as craft revitalization or identifying local assets and making them suitable for global markets through design. It can be infrastructural, such as transferring, existing technologies into the local, or it can be social, such as educational or policy development. And these design interventions mostly employ participatory design methods, which are basically for involving non-designer stakeholders into the design process so that their situated expertise would be part of the designing process. And actually, this participatory design method spawned from Europe, from Scandinavia around 70s, with the aim of increasing the value of industrial production by engaging workers into the development of new design of work systems and workplaces. And originating from workplace studies, originating from Europe tradition, this expansion of participatory design methods beyond Scandinavia into the global south, into the local rural contexts, it emphasizes the integration and empowerment of the local communities. However, this expansion, especially lately, also has raised critical questions regarding to applicability of Western-centric methods into diverse cultural contexts. The central notion in these methods, such as free individual citizen or includes activities such as volunteering, do-it-yourself, individual action, all which are found very Western concepts. Lately, it is highlighted that design practices are far from universally applicable and participatory approaches needs to engage in non-Western contexts and different epistemologies to expand and enrich its knowledge space. There's an increased recognition in importance of context-specific varied form of knowledge, also context-responsive methods. So within that, discourse, I take, so for me, in the weaving in the village was already a very relevant cooperative designing and making process to the design fields that we can learn from. I take it as seriously as any activity any design activity in an institutional setting, such as in a university or a corporate. So my aim became to understanding the dynamics of participation, facilitation, and cooperation in the weaving and bringing them into the wider discussion in participatory design field, bringing these local understandings into the design field so that we have a more rich understanding of what participation can be. I emphasize the importance of contextual embedded methods. So I want to explain a little bit my own field strategy with an example. In the field, I ask many times in different looms to different people, who is the owner of this loom? Is it yours? Generally, the answer was it was the property of the villagers, not ours. At first, I thought that this means that loom were the common property of the villagers. And it was like, oh, it is interesting. There is no specific owners. Means of production is a common property. But in time, when I spent more time in the field, women get acquainted with me and comfortable with me, I realized that that is not the case. One day, one of the women started to complain about somebody didn't lend the comb that she wanted and was kind of gossiping about her a little bit. That conversation evolves into the realization that the loom is not everyone's common property. Actually, none of the women has a full loom. Each piece has a specific owner and they know who has what. So when a group decided to set up a loom, they go door to door and collect the pieces. For this reason, when I ask who is the owner, they just give this general answer of, it is the villages. But what they mean is it is collected. And I think this situation shows two things. First is the effect of material properties of objects on social organization and relationships. The comp is the most specialized tool in the weaving, as it is made of metal, consists of fine teeth. All other parts are made from wood, thus are relatively easy to repair and replace. Women have explained to me that there are very few combs in the village, and most of them in poor condition. So those who have good combs share them with people who they just trust. So comb form different forms of relations than it is wooden parts when they are shared. So I take the field in a co-constitutive relatedness between human and non-human elements. Objects interact with us through their physical surface. Their material qualities determine how an object will behave or react. Another example could be because the loom is so big, it has to be done in the street and turn the street into a workshop and maximize the sociality around the loom. So I paid specific attention to objects, sizes, shapes, sensory properties, as a part of the interaction of these women, as well as of course, the social relations. Secondly, I think this example shows that what kind of knowledge is situated local craft practices possesses. Craft knowledge is often implicit, communicated through, making, doing. It is informal, daily, and procedural. So it was a context where asking questions didn't work because it is very daily and tacit. So asking who is the owner, directly didn't yield any correct answers. So I follow anthropologist Tim Ingold learning from inside approach, which he defines as a discussion grounded in a context of practical activity, which means that if, when doing field work in a craft related practice, it needs to go beyond participatory observation. It necessitates involvement in making activity. So I try to engage each step of weaving process, try to make with the woman where I am capable. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Final slide. My final slide isn't here. Okay. Let me say it anyway. So at the end, I kind of come up with 5 aspects of weaving, show the different dimensions. Dowry as a social norm is the main reason why these women weave. Women weave on the street in front of everybody's eyes to prepare dowry. While do so, they also manifest that they are part of the community and they are following the social norms. So there's this reciprocity between making and social relations where kind of both reproduce each other. And of course, this reciprocity, I think, comes from the weaving necessitates working together at each steps, from the dispersed ownership of the loom parts, from the hardship of each step of weaving, to the sizes of the materials that it need to be done outside, increasing sociality. These material properties of the weaving creates these attachments within the community to work together. So I think this participatory capacity, in a very, very short sense, come from this intertwined nature of social and material actors come together and build this participatory environment. So that's all from me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gizem. They're really interesting reflections on methodology there, I think, building on the conversation we finished the last panel with. Thank you. So our final speaker today and in this panel is Eve Grinstead, who is speaking on a paper called Women Weaving Their Way in the Newly Formed United Arab Emirates.
Yes. Can we see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, good. There
Do you
was,
want
like everyone else or a few other people, I had some glitches with.
Okay. Can
And
you go to full screen? That work?
yes,
Perfect.
that works. Okay, so I
Yeah.
can only see my screen. I can't see anything on the PowerPoint. So if anything goes wrong, just please say it out loud.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Eve.
Let me just get the timer because it's a little bit short. I'm very happy to be here today to present this paper on women and weaving in the newly formed United Arab Emirates. My name is Yves Grinstead. I am a PhD candidate at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. And before I go any further, I would just like to thank Harriet, Matthew, Jessica, and Anne for all of their um, communication and hard work to get this organized across many different continents and time zones. So many of you may be familiar with the UAE, but you may not know that for a long time it was referred to as the Trucial States, which was a group of loosely associated territories called the Trucial States or Trucial Oman from about the mid-19th century through 1971. At this point, the territories united as a federation of 7 different states, each run by its own sheikh and royal family, the largest of which and the capital being Abu Dhabi. By law, the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi is always the president of the UAE, and in 1971, in this case, it was Sheikh Zayed. This man is known as the father of the nation, and he's a very founding father type figure, and because he's the only one associated with the country, he has that much more importance. One thing that many people find surprising about him is that he was always in favor for improving the lives of women in the UAE. Unlike what we might think in the West about the various societies on the Arabian Peninsula, women have a great deal more freedom and rights than what they may assume. Often smaller countries on the peninsula like the UAE, but also Qatar or Kuwait, are confused with Saudi Arabia, creating a misconception of women's rights. For the rights of women in the UAE, this is the case not just now, but also historically, as women have long played a role in politics, business, and other parts of nomadic society. From the very beginning, Sheikh Zayed encouraged female participation in the workforce so that the UAE would not have to depend as much on foreign help, being that their population was so scarce. Despite the fact that local women were always valued by society, some families weren't as comfortable as he was with putting women more in a public context. So one way that this was combated was through the help of his wife, Sheikha Fatima. She was his third wife, but was often referred to as the first lady during his presidency, and is also called al-Amarat, or the mother of the Emirates. She's an essential figure both for female empowerment in the country, as well as the safeguarding of traditional crafts. Now, taking a step back, because I've said a few things about gender, but also crafts that may not be what your typical idea of the UAE is, and it's probably what you see on screen more, that you think of these very bling bling modern marvels of architecture. The country has gone through exponential change in just 50 years of existence. Even as you can see in the early 90s and 2000s, the cities looked quite different. And this has also had a very strong impact on the people, where they feel at once catapulted into the future with all of the modern amenities that comes with it, and yet a nostalgia for the past and fear of loss of tradition and their nomadic society. So there's always this sort of dichotomy of past and future, not just within the people that were alive before the unification of the country, but even amongst young people. So back to Sheikha Fatima. Since the establishment of the country, she has endeavored to improve the situation of women in the UAE. And this is not the same as women's empowerment in the West, because women never really felt disadvantaged there, but more, as mentioned earlier, to give them a more active role in public society and the workforce. On screen, you see some of her accolades and accomplishments, and a lot of these are in the form of women's groups or women's associations that fall under the umbrella organization, the General Women's Union, that from the beginning proposed classes to teach women skills to be more easily hireable, such as reading, writing, typing, and other secretarial skills, but also sewing and handicrafts. So the General Women's Union is the formal representative of Emirati women, taking an active interest in all aspects of women's lives, from their health to education, family counseling, and legislation. Today, under the guidance of Sheikha Fatima, these projects have been widely expanded, and the General Women's Union seeks to build women competencies in partnership with UN Women so they can enter all fields, including technology and the UAE government. I promise we get back to crafts. But also part of the General Women's Union mandate is to preserve the country's unique heritage. And a major way this is accomplished is through the Women's Handicraft Center. Founded in 1975, so just after the country was unified as a federation, the center is a site of active creation with nearly 70 women practicing their talents. They are also fondly known as the guardians of heritage, ranging from age 30 to the oldest one not knowing her age because she was born well before hospitals were widespread in the UAE and never had a birth certificate. Many came to this center thanks to campaigns set up by Sheikha Fatima, and some have been there for decades. At the center, women create tali, a kind of embroidery, while others hand wool for al-sadu, a traditional form of weaving. Others tailor clothing, create intricate beaded patterns to add to dresses, sew extravagant kandoras and jabalayas, or weave carpets. In addition to textiles, some women use date palm tree branches to make khus baskets or floor mats.
Eve, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but someone's just pointed out that your slides actually appear in cropped on the screen.
Oh.
I wonder if you could maybe go out of full screen and see if that makes a difference. I think it's just, yeah, that's better. I think maybe if we just view the slides that way. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, that works for
Right.
me better. Should I just maybe, can you see you want to see other ones?
I think it's fine because we could see the middle part. I think some of the words came off, but your explanation of the slides is perfect. So I don't think any meaning was lost.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. A bit more on these techniques. Okay. Sorry, I got discombobulated. So tali was invented by the Bedouins. It is a skill passed on for generations among Emirati women. It is a kind of embroidery that was used originally as decoration for the cuffs, collars, and hemlines of traditional garb such as thobe and kandora, made from cotton and a mix of gold and silver thread. The pattern is woven or braided with several bobbins of threads and the use of a special pillow. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but that's the one the woman in the top left has in front of her, called a musada, and a little stand called a kajuja. The pillow is put on the stand and used as support. The technique is not easy. The process is time consuming, and many Emirati women begin learning this craft from childhood. Turnaround time for each garment varies. Finishing a kandora, for example, using these traditional techniques can take up to a month, making it almost couture-like in its execution. Al-sadu is another traditional form of weaving, originally practiced by women from nomadic tribes. Unlike the tali, it is made on a loom. Using sheep, camel, and goat wool, women create distinctive designs rich with geometric patterns that often reflect both social identity and the surrounding environment. Historically, it also had more of a practical use to create necessities like carpets, blankets, and bait al-shahar tents. In the past, these tents helped protect families from the sweltering heat and the scorching desert sun. It was also sometimes used for accessories for camels called atad. Items woven through sadu have diverse motifs and designs. They often include symbols of palm trees, sheep, camels, or other parts of nomadic life, as well as verses from the Quran. In ancient times, these motifs would also represent tribal symbols. The technique is extensive and, depending on the design, 1 meter of al-sadu can take anywhere from 2 days to a week. In 2011, thanks to efforts of Sheikha Fatima and the General Women's Union, the al-sadu technique was put on UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding. Finally, khus involves the weaving or braiding together of date palm fronds to form an object. Some examples include surud, circular mats on which food is placed, mahafa, a fan used to cool oneself or to fan a flame, makaba, used to cover and protect food, and jafir, a basket to carry dates. Beyond the creation side of the center, there is also a pedagogical one. While some women there were taught the handicrafts by their mothers or grandmothers, still others learned it at the center, becoming skilled in all the techniques before choosing the one that they excel at and want to specialize in. The center also provides coaching lessons to anyone who's interested, regardless of nationality. School children and students regularly visit the center, as the General Women's Union recently signed an agreement with the Ministry of Education to enable students to visit the center to meet its artisans and see their handicrafts. An annual competition for the best traditional costume also attracts many entries, demonstrating the next generation's fascination with tradition. The center also includes a permanent exhibition. On display are everyday objects that illustrate the history of the various territories that now comprise the UAE. Artifacts include Bedouin tents, rugs, blankets, traditional dress, beauty products, and other aspects of traditional life in the Emirates that elsewhere seem to be slowly disappearing. The center and others like it also have an important socioeconomic impact. Since the establishment of the first center in the 70s, other ones like it have popped up throughout the 7 Emirates. For some women, the center is their family's main source of income in cases of deceased husbands or other family members or divorce. Also important for such individuals is the community it provides. Weaving in the UAE is a highly social activity, and the center allows for women of varying ages to work together and provides them with a strong community, especially important for widows or divorcees. While weaving, they converse, exchanging family news and stories, and in this way, folk tales and proverbs are passed down through generations or remain alive. Beyond the center, the General Women's Union showcases these handicrafts whenever official delegations visit the country and also sends its products to Emirati embassies around the world. In a more modern twist, with an increasing interest for such traditional handicrafts, there is a demand for their application onto modern items, such as those on the screen here, like travel tags, laptop covers, bag straps, among others. Further afield, a similar women's center from Sharjah, a neighboring emirate, was chosen a few years ago to partner with the international luxury brand Osprey to create a limited edition range of bags named quite suitably One Stitch at a Time. You see them on the bottom of the screen here. The same center also created a tali design collection for Emirati-inspired catwalk looks for the Accademia Italiana during the prestigious Alta Roma fashion event in Rome in 2015. Thanks to the initial efforts of Sheikha Fatima and all of the guardians of heritage who have been able to lend their skills to the Women's Handicraft Center, traditional techniques such as those discussed in this presentation not only live on in the UAE, but also elsewhere in the world, and sometimes in more contemporary style. The center has also given dozens of women a livelihood and sense of community that they may not have had otherwise in their rapidly changing country. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. That's a fascinating view. Right, can I invite our 2 speakers to come back, please? Gizem and Eve, you just keep your mic on. Thank you. So, as Anne said, we now have a question and answer tab, so you can put your questions in there, or if you want to put your hands up and ask a question, please do, to our final speakers, and then I think we'll maybe go into a sort of summing up after that. again, I think there were lots of overlaps and interesting parallels between the two papers. I think I have a question which is to Eve, but it's prompted by something that Gizem talked about, the idea of the ownership of the tools. I thought that was so interesting, the story of the looms being owned by a community, but in a partial sense, and they have to come together to put this together. And Eve, you may have explained it already and I missed it, but what is the sort of ownership of the tools and equipment that are being used for the people you're working with?
So I haven't come across any specific information on that through my research, but I would assume based on how other things, other associations work in the UAE. I mean, the thing about the country is that because there's also royal families, there's a very fine line between what is privately owned, publicly owned, what is public, what is state, what is royal. So I believe that anything that was founded by the center was a lot of times royal women that founded associations like that would gift items from their personal, I don't want to say personal collection because it was more of a practical item, but then probably later ones were fabricated just for that purpose. I would think that because the different women would come to this center, they wouldn't have their own looms or other tools, but that's true. That's something that I haven't yet come across, but it's interesting fodder for future research.
There's something about the portability of them as well, isn't there? That maybe comes from a nomadic tradition in UAE, but also in your Turkish examples, Gizem, is about things are taken apart and put back together. There's like there's a temporal element to the practices and the spaces in which they happen.
Yeah, exactly. Before going into mine, maybe, yeah, I find it the loom examples in Eve's case very interesting because they were very kind of crisps and also have circular section of the pieces. So it was like specifically produced for that purpose, these pieces. So I was also interested in who produced this, how they come about with the loom, because it seems very specifically produced comparing to looms in my context, which are very, kind of making do or bricolage sense of doing things. Yes, in my case, it's like the looms were like almost like an IKEA furniture. They can easily assemble and disassemble during the winter months, which is very cold in Turkey, and in that part of the Turkey, the piece, everybody get their piece at the end of the summer and put it in their empty rooms or some cellars, places like that. And when the summer comes, whoever wants to have a children in the marriage age, who wants to weave, collect the pieces, come together with the neighbors and weave together. So yes, there's this temporal sense of the practice, which also makes me consider of the geographical condition of the village, ecological conditions of the village, the weather. All of these things kind of affect actually the craft practice. Can I? Okay.
Sorry, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I will have a question for you, if that's okay. Yeah, I was kind of wondering how you come up with this subject and how you started the study in the United Emirates.
Oh, that is a very long story.
No, sorry.
I mean, my PhD dissertation is on the role of women in the contemporary art scene in the UAE. But several of the nonprofit art centers, the art foundations, are run by sheikhas, by royal members. And because in the three most populous emirates that have a large art scene, this is the case, I thought that there has to be something beyond this. And this is where I came across the figure of Sheikha Fatima, who really is the mother of the Emirates in so many different ways. And so she sort of began a kind of, by starting the General Women's Union, she started this, the other sheikhas, even not from her family, seemed to want to live up to her example by establishing other foundations. And so those are the ones I studied. But as a result, because there's not many people that are studying the role of women in the UAE, anytime I can learn more about different aspects of it, I try to. And so, there's more and more we hear the term Global South, but not a lot. So when I saw this,
exactly.
especially not coming from a Western university, we hear the term a lot in scholarship and academia in the Gulf, but not necessarily elsewhere. So, being from the States and living in Paris and studying the UAE, I think it's really important to be able to know about one region and share it in another. So crafts are certainly not my specialty, but if I can share it to an audience that is more learned in crafts, maybe they could be interested in that and prove me wrong about other things I've said, but at least someone will be, know more about the region.
Thank you.
We've had a question in the chat for Gizem from Julie Blanchard Emerson, who's at UCA. Hi, Julie. The question is to Gizem, and she's saying that you've described how the loom pieces are shared, but is the making of each piece also shared? And if it is, then how does that reflect or construct kind of particular relationships in that community? You mentioned there about the idea of people with children who are of marriage age. Is it about those kind of familial relationships?
Yeah, the relative relationship is maybe a little different, but it is very close in this village. For example, maybe in the pictures you see the apartment buildings. They all live together in an apartment, so they relatives. So so there is no really difference between a family and their relatives. So they are kind of, when somebody wants to view their relatives and neighbors, kind of, okay, let's do it and involve within the context of that relative blood relative relationship. And they also share the products because as I said, it is really hard to view, and when they need to open the warp, they need to open it quite long, because of the hardship. When they start to do it, they want to do for everybody else. So they open the warp together. That means that they need to also collaborate to decide the patterns and the colors together. So that was my, opening image is from that these people, holding this different colors together because they need to try to decide which colors they should use, and everybody like discussing. There is this a little bit of a chaotic environment. Let's put a little bit red more, or no yellow. I like yellow. All this kind of conversation. So that kind of again the physical necessities of the weaving, that the type of weaving they do, they need to come together, open the warp together, and they need to decide the colors and patterns together, and at the end, because they share the products as well.
That's fascinating. It kind of leads to a question I had, I think, that comes off the back of something that Eve said about describing the spaces, this centre where the making happens as a site of sociability and it having many more kind of social cultural functions, or that the practice of craft is then integral to these social and cultural experiences and sociabilities. And Gizem, it reminded me of what you said about your experience of learning from the inside and actually going into these spaces and experiencing them. I wondered if you could both just say a bit more about that experience of being in those spaces and what that is and what functions occur in them, and what the place of making is amongst those maybe diverse and varied functions of those spaces.
Okay. Should I start? I don't. Okay. Yeah, for me it is really interesting because most of the time the public space in villages, in a very general sense, we can say that it is a mostly male-dominated space. But when this time of the year comes, it becomes this almost a workshop. They just close the street. and they kind of redirect the cars to other roads because they need to be. But of course, that also come from the collective social norm of the village, which is dowry and importance of marriage. So they kind of intervene together, but gives this weaving production creates a space for women to be active in the public space of the village. In terms of my presence and experiences there, I try, and this is kind of same discussion with the last session. I really think about the power relations in the field, especially the ones that I am creating, because I try to be as like, I am a student who's here to learn from you, and I will do my homework here instead of researcher coming from a big city. And try not to create those kind of hierarchies between myself and the woman. But of course, there is always this insider-outsider relationship among us. They kind of see themselves as a community and me as an outsider. So I was always trying to be self-reflexive about these positionings that I've been having in the field, as well as my prejudices about what a village is, what a local life is. Because, for example, maybe you realize in the pictures there are like concrete buildings in this village, and when I first saw it, what it's like, what, it is like a city, it should be like wooden houses, whatever. So there was a small shop, supermarket in the village itself. They use cell phones. So I was, is this really a village kind of? So I also need to reconsider my prejudices about local production, what is local, what is rural, what is a village is, and try to be, and try to disseminate them and kind of really understand how women position themselves, how they define their rurality, locality, or being a community.
Yeah, and in my case, the idea of space in what's now the UAE is an interesting concept, because for so long it was a Bedouin society. And so while there may have always been this idea of women in an enclosed space weaving together or doing these crafts together, it was, unlike now, not in the similar space as in the Women's Handicraft Center, but in various tents that would move around. And so it was sort of the context and each woman together that created that space. So that's something, it's more the idea and the company that makes it special and important, rather than power given to a physical structure. Something else I noticed, and it's interesting, you said that you were a student. I always would say I was an artist, because then, if you say you're an artist or artisanal, there's a kind of mutual understanding of creation. And yeah, I think if I came from a very far way away and I was studying these, women or these products as if it was sort of some sort of, I don't know, I wasn't comfortable with the sort of anthropological kind of setting. So I would say I was an artist, and that usually had some of the women be a little bit more open to share. This being said, I don't speak Arabic, and some of them do speak English, some of them don't. Some of them would be very open to share their experiences and about the techniques, and others wouldn't. But I think that is more to do with it's not, I don't think it was just me as an artist coming in or as a foreigner. I think it was some are just more shy than others. There's also still some women that are very uncomfortable with being that much in the public, even though they've been there for a long time. So I think that, as I said, the UAE has changed so much, so radically in the last 50 years. If it weren't for places like this, spaces like this would have been preserved, and that could have very much affected not just the longevity of these crafts, but also an entire part of society would have been completely pushed to the side. And so it kind of allows them this bubble of time to continue the society they had before. even though ironically not in a nomadic context as it were.
Fascinating. Harriet, you got a question?
I do. Just following on from that, the thought popped into my mind about my own position regards the people I'm interviewing, and it's often been my instinct to try and say I want to actually learn how to do this, which in some instances, looking at the case studies that I've presented to you today is easier. And this was really a question to both of you, but it was also a question to all our speaker colleagues, which was to ask how far you all feel that you're missing out somehow by not practicing what you're studying, and whether you ever feel the compunction to take on some element of learning the craft skills that are being practiced, so that you can come away with any kind of greater understanding just through doing it, making. It's just a general kind of general wonder, really, to all of us.
I think that's such an interesting question. Because do you have a response? Yeah.
Not a response, but maybe just to share. It's a really good question, and I think it really resonates with the Tim Ingold's learning from inside perspective, where you need kind of to get that tacit knowledge of crafts, you need to somehow be a part of it, be making it. During my PhD, I really can't put a pin that by doing it, I realized that I can't, just cannot build direct relations. But through that, I also started to weave during my PhD just to understand, but in a, very small, frame loom. But just I thought that, okay, if I'm learning from inside, I should understand the logic of the weaving, that all, vertical and horizontal lines coming together. So I started to weave and learn a little bit, and I also in my field, as I said, I try to be part of the weaving process as much as I can. Although I know very little, I only spoil their weaving, so so they were a little bit anxious about it all as well. So but I think that I feel like that was a very necessary part of the process. So I try to do as much as I can, but I can't really also say that, this direct relations, this is what I do and this is what I realize. Otherwise, I can't.
Yeah. Whenever I go to the UAE for research trips, I unfortunately don't have as much time as I would like. When I visited the Women's Center, I would have, for one, it's open to the public for only a short period of time. I certainly would love in future trips to be able to participate in a seminar or classes, as it is open to all nationalities. But I'm not sure how much it would actually change my understanding and views of it, because I don't think I would never be an Emirati woman. And I've said this also for, I will never be an Emirati princess for the Sheikhs. So in a lot of ways, I'm very much an observer, and I just see what's going on there, do my research and report on it, and try to link it to a greater context and certain arguments I make in my PhD. But in this case, it's such a specific field. I think I could certainly happily go through the process of trying to learn. I don't think I should, because then they probably would know I'm not an artist, because I'm not very skilled with my hands, and then my cover would be blown. But I think it's a valid question of living the experience they do.
I really like this question, and as Eve says, even when I used to go to India for my research trips, there was such little time, and I'm really quite rubbish with my hands, to be honest. I did, however, I did sit in on one of the artisans, the people that were working with textiles, but no, nothing came of it. But it was just interesting to be there and feel a little bit more as part of them. I was the only woman, however, in this whole thing. And so they just assumed that I'd be good because I started out by saying, I'm going to be terrible, so please don't mind when I have nothing at the end of this day. And they're like, no, 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 you'll be really good. And we know that. I think it was that thing of, oh, no, she's a woman and she'll be able to sew and stitch or whatever. I was, nah. I could have either written the PhD or learned weaving.
Maybe quickly, in my case, I spent 1 year in the field, so it was a long time, but there were many different topics. So there was also this question of time, but I did learn some of the technique, and I really enjoyed it, and it was very interesting. I mean, they work with a plant similar to aloe vera, like it's you can hurt yourself very badly. And I experienced that myself. So for me, it was very important to learn some of the technique. But of course, I'm not an expert.
I do think that's fascinating. I mean, we work at UCA and at London Met with a lot of practice-based researchers where the way of knowing through the practice is a really important part of the research. And I think it's interesting then to look at what it is to research into practitioners and trying to engage with that level of knowledge they may have that we might not have access to without those skills. We've had a question in the chat as well, which is for Eve, but I think maybe opens up to, again, lots of the other speakers who have talked about the idea of kind of funding and financial support and bringing these commercial aspects in. So the question is, to what extent do you think collaborations with Western recognised brands or designers is an appropriate way to place traditional crafts on a global stage? In the case of UAE, do you think such projects only serve to perpetuate a Western view of the country? The asker of the question declares that they are themselves Emirati, and so grateful to seeing a refreshing take on the region. So thank you for that question. That's great. So to Eve that, but then I think we could broaden that out specifically to this question of what it is to bring these crafts into a global stage through commercial partnerships.
I think it's maybe not a very satisfying response probably, but I think it really would just depend the context. I mean, I think in the cases that I mentioned, it was that the actual women's center was specifically called upon to make the items in question. And it was those specific designs. And so it wasn't just a kind of motif that was taken or inspired a certain designer, but they actually got credit. Whereas, you know, sometimes we've seen with more recently Zara, but also in the past, Yves Saint Laurent would sometimes take, or Louis Vuitton would take different patterns and not necessarily say that this is a traditional pattern from here or there. So I think it really depends the context, and is it coming from the UAE or from the local place, or is it the brand, a Western brand that's doing so? So I think that deserves, you know, to be more nuanced. But in this case, also some things I found in my research is that there are, in the same way that there's a lot of the sheikhs I've studied have established their own organization or women's group, sometimes not related to art or contemporary art as I study, or handicrafts, sometimes for a variety of different fields, but there's actually often collaborations with different luxury brands. And so that's something that I think I haven't studied enough to comment more on, but this is not just the only context of collaborations like this going on. And so I think it definitely deserves more study, and I think it can't be answered in a simple yes or no question, if that makes sense.
Anyone else want to reflect on that? Or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in my case, yeah, one of the things that I think about so I find it really interesting. What am I gonna do with it when I encounter this weaving? practice. Then I turned into literature, and I saw that many of the design practice in local rural context, actually, as I said in my presentation, come from this idea of intervening and making this better, trigger change, whatever. And when it comes to craft, it's very related to designers, designing brand identity or designing products that may appeal to the mass global market. But that idea most of the time also means that kind of making things more compliant or docile, so that it could sell more. I think, and this come from, I think, this development-centered idea where, as you talk about it before, the economic development equal to empowerment or social welfare, whatever. So there's a lot of things to be discussed, considered first before making any kind of intervention in this kind of context. I think in my case, as I said, women even consider selling is a huge no-no. You can't put a price on it. So in my case, that was a road I never think about going through. Because it wasn't definitely not compatible with the community's values and norms. That should be another thing, if it is that community ready, or it should be like top-down thing. But through my second-hand research, I saw a lot of these kind of interventions and opening up really just merge through with this development idea or capitalistic, ideas, which does not go very well.
Brilliant, thank you. Harriet, I don't know, shall I pass over to you for some closing comments? I feel like that's, we don't have any more questions in the chat, and that was just a fantastic conclusion, I think, to this panel. Thank you to Eve and to Gizem for your papers and your brilliant discussion afterwards. Harriet, are you going to do some closing comments for us to try and sum up this brilliant day?
Actually, Anne was going to has thought through some things to say. What I wanted to do, we had a comment in one of the breaks. Somebody had said, if I'm still formulating my thoughts and I want to speak to earlier panels, can I do so? And I said, yes, please come back, and we can all kind of have a little recap at the end. So that's my the thing that I want to say. I don't know whether that person, I'm sorry, I've forgotten who you were, but whether that person or anyone else has anything you'd like to put to any of the speakers whilst we're still together before Anne does offer a bit of a wrap up.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello, thank you so much for the attention. Because I was trying to write the question down after all the presentations, and it's becoming really complex. So I don't know if there's a question in there or just a general reflection of my own work based on what I listened. But thank you so much for all the presentations. They were really beautiful. So I'm a graphic designer and artist researcher from Syria, and I studied art and design in Europe, where I had to relocate. And the design and art canon that I studied in Belgium, where I'm currently based, is very much modernist and white and Western, which I had to work on to reconstruct, study all over, just really study my own design history and art history, self-study, reference, art and design histories that I can relate to in Syria and also in the Levant. And crafts histories and cultures were definitely a huge reference to understand art and design through. Which is also very complex because the access to this knowledge becomes really, it becomes also challenging because, of forced displacement, state violence, the difficulty in continuing crafts as well in these contexts. So there's also these contexts to take into consideration while doing the research and to trying to learn or practice or meet people who are craftspeople, to understand from them. So yeah, so this, it becomes like, yeah, an added experience when trying to research and yeah, practice. But I think the question that I had in the break was about craft washing, because this is the first time that I hear this term.
I just actually, I sorry to interrupt you, but I made it up as we were speaking. So let that not kind of throw you off track. It was something that just came to me as we were speaking.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's very interesting, because I see in art and design there's an important wave that is happening, like in my own work, in the work of friends around me, of reclaiming that histories, these practices, or whether it is through learning or practicing or meeting people who have practiced this, to learn from it, to document it, to collaborate, or just continue that work. But then there's also context in which it does feel like it's being used in this way. So it's I think wanted to understand more, when is it then craft washing, but how is that also connect or balance or seen in relation to reclaiming something, I don't know if it's like, if my question is clear, but I also trying to make it clear for myself. Thank you.
Shall I? I'm not quite sure if I have, this being a very new concept for me, as I say, the idea of crafts washing. I think that that may be something that I'm accusing kind of the bigger bodies or organizations or brands of doing, but I think there is, at the same time, I think, and they're driven by the twin kind of prongs of climate change and thinking more locally and sustainably, but also in the West, sort of I don't know, increasing questioning of late capitalism, then maybe there is also a genuine move towards thinking about the place of the crafts. I mean, maybe these things are cyclical. Maybe in the early 21st century, we're doing what William Morris and co. did in the late 19th century, and wanting to think about crafts and the artisanal and the local as an antidote to late industrial society. I don't know. There's so much in there. There is something else, I think, as well, that touches on the idea around authenticity, and that's something that we haven't really spoken about today, but is a huge can of worms. And I think that's the kind of geopolitical associations with craft and the way in which we use craft and the way in which craft, like language or foods or dress, can become more significant as a way of owning our identities in situations of displacement. And we haven't really gone down those lines, but there is a lot that's really interesting around that. And as I was beginning to write my book, I edited it out because I thought the paper was going to be too long. But one of my other thoughts was going to be about is craft. In the West, I think there's a trajectory where we think that craft is something that's divorced from technology, which ignores the fact that, say, a loom is technology. But anyway, we think of industrialization as kind of overriding craft. But in the context of a sort of wish to return to crafts and so on, something like Gandhi's weaponization of the loom in the pursuit of independence, I think, has huge political dimensions. And we haven't really touched on this whole kind of, there's quite an authentic drive towards crafts that can be used in all sorts of different ways that aren't necessarily intrinsic to craft practices themselves. And I use that example about Gandhi and the spinning wheel as kind of, in a way, an epitomization of that for me.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. Thank you.
There are scholars who say that Gandhi was the first designer for India. And Gandhi played a big role. I mean, as in my writing, I had a whole chapter almost dedicated to the spinning wheel. Because I think that's where it started, because he used it as, that was power in its core sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of, that's another seminar, I think.
Exactly.
The next one. Okay. Should we kind of wrap up now, unless anybody's got anything else?
I think Jess has a question.
Yeah.
So it is definitely a comment, not a question. Sorry, I hate to be that person. It's just to reinforce that conversation you've had there about that so much is what was coming out of that last panel. And the question we had from Amani in the chat is around cultural appropriation, isn't it? And Harriet, you opened the conference with this question of whether decolonisation still centres colonisation and colonialism. And so many of these questions that we've had throughout the day have been about how to engage without being extracting, like what the extractive processes of commerce can be, and how you look at things without centering the global north still. And I just feel like that idea of appropriation and extraction are quite important topics that have come out through the day. But thank you.
Good point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jess. So, I mean, if I go back to what I opened with, I'm absolutely blown away by how far we've come with our ambitions for the event. I think we've really heard from the experts, and a lot of the spirit of today has been about collaboration. And I thought decolonisation was controversial, but it seems as if not. There wasn't a lot of controversy around that. There wasn't much controversy over the global south, which Harry and I thought there might be, but that seemed to be an accepted sort of shorthand for what we're talking about. So I mean, what we aimed to do was to provide a platform and some kind of a framework perhaps for taking this sort of discussion forward and filling in this massive gap. So I'm just wondering how we do that without being colonial, if you want. Because our idea was to perhaps edit a collection of, like do an edited collection of chapters coming out of the conference and perhaps publish that here. But is that the correct approach? I don't know. Perhaps we should be more collaborative and ask everybody what they feel we should be doing to take this forward. Yes. Jessica?
Sorry, I just put it in the chat that the point about open access publishing and publishing through non-commercial publishers is an interesting thing to think about, maybe.
Perhaps that's something we could think about, or try and get some funding to take this whole discussion forward, because I think it is so important. It's international, it's bringing in areas and new methodologies and new approaches to the disciplines that I think are really key at this moment in time. So it's how do we take this forward? So I think in edited collection, perhaps, as Jeff suggested, with an open access publication, so that would make it more amenable and not, no financial barriers. So that could be one thought.
And I think, sorry, Anne, I think having the voices of makers is really important in here. I mean, it might be the voices of the makers attached to the case studies.
Yeah.
But it might also be people who are not necessarily practitioners and not necessarily academics, but for example, this friend of mine, Radhi Parekh, I don't know if anyone, particularly our Indian colleagues, have come across her gallery in Mumbai. She runs a gallery called Artisans, and her strapline is really intriguing. It's, I think she calls it a place for the crossover between design and craft. And so people who are very concerned to explore the crafts through other avenues, such as exhibition, that might be another avenue. But I definitely think that the voices of the makers, I mean, yes, there are all those kind of anthropological difficulties about interviewing and so on and so on and so forth. But if interviews are conducted by people who are habitually working on site, then I think we obviate some of the problems around external people coming in. But I do think those personal voices, and the live stories as well, the lived experience of being craft practitioners is something that I'd like to see in there. I'd like to hear. I'd like to know. I can see Rukmini is wanting to say something, but I would be very pleased to hear from our audience. And maybe this is something that we can invite. I'd love to hear what our audience would like to see develop.
I enjoyed what you just said, and it sort of reminded me of something. When I started out my PhD, I started it as a practice-based part practice. I mean, I changed that a year later because for very different reasons, because by then the artisans had become quite central to my narrative, and I had to sort of rework the narrative. But I had thought, and I still want to at some point, I know I can't bring the craftspeople here because that is a whole can of worms, funding and all of that. But I did think that I would like to have an exhibition which would be a sort of immersive exhibition where one would go and film them making, have them talking about what they do. So have the object in situ at the exhibition, let's say, but you'd have videos of the people making, their text, their voice, the sounds, that kind of immersive exhibition. Call it a 3D exhibition. And it is something I put forth, but it requires some funding, if nothing. But it was a thought that I would like people to see the objects from the maker's point of view.
Yeah.
I think a website can work well along those lines potentially. And this time last year, I was on sabbatical and I was beginning to think that actually maybe a supporting website that people like ourselves can contribute to, that ties in with a publication, that ties in with today's symposium, and acts as a resource for networking, but also an informational resource, could be a way forward. Of course, all these things require time and money, but yeah, for sure.
I think it's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, the website I think was a great place to start with.
Can we invite any further comments from our audience? Does anyone have anything that you'd like to suggest to us? Because we're very, very open to hearing thoughts.
There's a comment in the chat from Philippa Longson saying, in the theme of a seminal book, architecture without architects, design without designers.
Hello, Pip. Hi, Pip. Yes, like it. It's a good point, actually. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Very good. We like it. Thank you.
Thank you.
or the opposite, designers without design. I think that there's something about removing that the controversy around that book, Architecture Without Architects, is that it disregards the work of actual producers by saying just because you're not architects, you're not involved in architecture.
Yeah, I think decolonizing craft sums up a lot of what we've been saying. The title.
And I think one of the things that has been really brought home is the extent to which, and I think someone actually said this, the commonalities and the problems are global. And that in a way that's quite reassuring. The many groups and the many people and the many areas of the world that have been under discussion this morning, there are themes that cross over and crisscross throughout. And I found that really fascinating. And quite a joyful thing, actually, even if we've been talking about problems. And there's something very human about what we've been talking about all morning. I think that may be one of the things that does come into an understanding of craft. And if we're going to, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I really don't like making silos of craft and design, but the humanality, the humanness of craft making, craft design, is something that is really encouraging to have thought through this morning. So really big thanks to our audience and to our speakers. Hello.
Sorry, I know that we have to go, but like I just wanted to say thank you very much and congratulations for having such a diverse panel. Jessica has heard me so many times complain about I'm tired of white people talking about decolonization, because this should be coming from people that we have experienced inequality towards race and culture. And I mean, I appreciate like I'm someone that is in between cultures. So for me, it's very difficult, but I think that this decolonization topic has to be led by people that have been actually colonized more than white people.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for a fantastic event, far better than Harry and I had imagined, I think, a year ago. And we'll think about how to take all of this forward, or we welcome your input actually in leading this forward.
And we will be in touch with speakers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very
so
much.
Thank you.
Yeah, for all the organization and all the presenters. Thank you.
Yeah, well done, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, too, for your your panel chairing.
No problem. It's been great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I was waiting for the others. Wow.
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 Phew.
I thought that was amazing.
It was extraordinary, actually, having people from across the world like that.
Yeah.
Which was nerve-wracking, part of my nerves, but actually, I mean, I don't know why, because there's no difference between, you know, being in Stoke or London or, I don't know, Birmingham, but at the same time, it kind of felt it up to the ante. But there was a lot of chat, a lot of questions. Hi, Matthew.
Hi.
Hi. We're just kind of taking a moment to
Shall
go.
I stop the recording?
Oh, yes.
Yes.